Next on Rugby Wrap-Up in a very special Murphy Kennedy Group Community Corner segment, Phaidra Knight, Alycia Washington, and Naya Tapper offer perspective on being a black woman and rugby player in America. Rugby Wrap-Up brought to you in part by The Pig and Whistle, the world's best rugby pub. The Murphy Kennedy Group, founded with the idea that construction can be done better. And Lean and Limber, stretching your way to a healthier lifestyle. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Rugby Wrap-Up. Matt McCarthy here in Midtown Manhattan for a very special Murphy Kennedy Group Community Corner segment. Last week, we had David Flemister, Derek Lipscomb, and Lawrence Blaber Jr., three black rugby players offering insight, re-racism, and how they've had to deal with it in and away from rugby in the United States. Today, we get the perspective from three prominent black women on the American rugby landscape. Phaidra Knight, Alycia Washington, and Naya Tapper are here, along with Mr. Stephen Lewis to help navigate this. As you know, Stephen is the two-time and still reigning USA Rugby Coach of the Year. Thank you to the pandemic. He is the head of the Jamaica Sevens program, both women and men. He is interim GM of Rugby United New York, and he is a champion of all peoples. Ladies, let me go through your bios quickly. Phaidra Knight, you are recently a USA Rugby Board of Director, World Rugby Hall of Famer. After a stellar career that featured playing in 3 Rugby World Cups and almost a 4th that I think you should have been in from 1999 through 2017. You are an entrepreneur. You were Player of the Decade as one of your accolades. You are from a very rural southern town, Irwinton, Georgia, with a population of something like 600 people. From there, you went to Alabama State before heading to the University of Wisconsin to study law and play rugby, I believe, for the first time. Culture shock on all levels. You and I are longtime members of the family that is the New York Rugby Club. You are Eagle number 99 and will be Agent number 99 in the movie that Martin Pengelly and I are writing, Rugby Spy, the story of a man named Lizard. Alycia Washington from Hamden, Connecticut, University of Connecticut, go Huskies. Eagle number 237, field hockey and track and field star before converting to rugby. USA Under-20s 2009, 2011, Collegiate All-American 15s 2011, 2012, Rugby World Cup 2017, and a fellow member of that New York Rugby Club family. That doesn't mean that Naya Tapper, however, cannot be member of that New York Rugby Club family. Eagle number 250 out of Beaufort, South Carolina, a very small town. After growing up as a military brat, a graduate of West Mecklenburg High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, and you're also a graduate from the University of North Carolina, go Tar Heels. For USA Rugby, a member of the 2017 World Cup team in 15s and the USA Rugby World Cup Sevens team in 2018. You are a bona fide superstar on the Sevens circuit, and you are now officially an honorable mention family member of the New York Rugby Club. This is going to be somewhat of an awkward conversation that Stephen will help me navigate a little bit better as we have issues in the country. And as we discussed some of them in the show last week, I thought it was important at least to lend you guys a platform to speak about certain things. And Phaidra, since you're the one that's been in the rugby space the longest out of this crew, I wanted to talk to you first and see what you thought about in terms of when you started playing to present day, changes in racism. Is it better? Is it worse? What is your perspective?
Well, my perspective through my lens is when I first started playing rugby at the University of Wisconsin, they immediately put me at the wing, not because I was fast, but they just wanted me to watch. And I have to give credit to Lisa Reel because I ended up making my way into the centers. That was my first position. And that's actually where I was aspiring to play when I was trying out for the Eagles. It wasn't until then that I got moved to prop. And so credit to Lisa Reel because she had a vision of me playing in the centers at the highest level. It wasn't necessarily at I think most or a lot of Black players or where they were put, right? They're either put in the pack where they have to do a ton of work, or they're put on the wing where they're, stereotypically, expected to sort of fly. And so, I had a really good experience, I think, initially going from a predominantly Black environment at Alabama State University to the University of Wisconsin, which was 1% Black during the time I was there. It was pretty stark, and so I was welcome into this group of women, very diverse in terms of, well, there wasn't necessarily racial diversity, but in terms of thought, in terms of sexuality, in terms of religion, it was just a mix. And so my experience, at least in that club and within the women's circle of rugby, was actually quite pleasant. Coming from a place like Irwinton, Georgia, where I feel like it's a hotbed, so I'm quite sensitive to racism, and I didn't feel that way. Now, obviously everyone has their own biases, but I was treated with the utmost respect. And maybe it was because I was a good athlete, but I think I would tend to think that with at least my club, it was genuine, right? Every person on that team was just genuine. I never, ever had the slightest. And those people that are on that club even now are some of the loudest voices in this, racial equity fight. And so I had a great experience. Now, did that necessarily translate into my on the pitch experience when it came to referees, particularly white male referees? And I experienced it up until, I won't say the end of my career, because 2017, it was a different dynamic, a different game. And, we know how pervasive racism is. And so maybe not from a ref's perspective, and maybe I didn't experience it because it just didn't impact me at that point. But I heard numerous experiences from fellow teammates. But I was in the thick of it in the prime of my career, between 1997 when I started playing, probably up until 2014. Yeah. And I know, right, I'm acquainted with some of the psychology behind, how white folks think. Again, I grew up in it. I've heard it. I've been called the N-word numerous times. And so I have some acquaintance with that. And when it happens over and over again, and when you have a referee telling you also on the pitch, or penalizing you or sin binning you when you just step on the pitch because of something that the other Black girl on the field did, she had maybe repeated infringements, you step on, it's a case of mistaken identity, or really isn't, right? If you want to call it racism, I guess you could call it systemic racism I've experienced in my role as a board member. Take a look at your USA Rugby Board of Directors. Okay, in the history of the organization, there have been 2 Black directors. One in the previous iteration of the board, and that was Danita Knox, and one in the present, or actually the second iteration of the board. Now it's changing over again, obviously with the restructuring, and that was me. And I was elected as an IA. So when you look at independent board of directors over the last decade or two, you've had no, outside of the IA world, you've had no Black directors. If you've had any Black employees in the national office, maybe it's been 1 or 2. Until there's a change, until there's more diversity, more women, more marginalized people that are at that board level and serving actually in the executive roles in that national office, we are just drastically undercutting ourselves. And I don't care how much restructuring we do, if we don't take diversity, equity, and inclusion as a priority, we're going to continue to fail.
So in essence, when you started playing, the racism for you on the pitch was basically from the referees, and cut to present day, in a certain way, it hasn't changed a lot in terms of what you've seen personally, except the lack of inclusion, so to speak, in certain levels, specifically in the administrative levels.
Well, just hearing, right? Like from my experience, yes.
So, Alycia, you've had a bit of a different perspective. You grew up in Hamden, Connecticut. You went to the University of Connecticut. You were a track and field and field hockey star before taking up rugby at 17, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'll add, I did gymnastics for 7 or 8 years in there as well. Then I got too big.
Gymnastics as well, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pretty broad background. But, you and I, we spoke a little bit off camera, and you told me of your first experience with racism. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, poor little second grade me, just fell in love with this boy in school. And then he told me that he wouldn't date me because I was black. And, my little 7 or 8 year old heart was just like absolutely broken. And I went home, crying, told my mom, and she was ready to go down to the school. And I was like, no, that would be so embarrassing. But I guess in hindsight, it would have led to a lot of education, maybe. I don't know. Maybe they would have said, oh, well, he didn't say that, or, it wasn't meant to be heard that way, yada, yada. A lot of the gaslighting that we experience at all different levels of being told, well, you didn't hear what you actually heard, which is definitely, what we hear a lot as both women and women of color. So yeah, still remember that day as if it were yesterday, just sobbed all day and realized that I didn't realize I was different until that point. And it was a very largely majority white school. So my brother and I were the diversity essentially. And then, didn't really notice it until that.
Have you seen progress? Have you seen regression in your space?
I would say with that boy, from what I saw on Facebook, no, he's still
the same.
That boy, yeah, for sure. In terms of my own spaces, I definitely surround myself with great people that are open-minded, or at least willing to be open-minded, and willing to educate themselves. Especially within rugby, I find myself avoiding some scenarios to not be let down. So, there's always usually before, pregame, whether it's for USA or for club, a pregame soundtrack that everyone's playing. And I will always bring my own headphones because when I hear the N-word really out loud blasting from the speaker of someone who is white, it really sort of gets me in a bad headspace. So I'm I don't know how you think that you own that word enough, even if, you're paying for the Spotify, you're paying for whatever it is, to blast that word in, and it really just throws me off. So I'll bring my own headphones to avoid scenarios like that. Or, if it's end of the club season, of course there'll be a social. I don't drink personally, but I find myself, once everyone starts getting closer to that 2 or 3 drinks, I'll find my own exit, because that's when people start to get a little bit uncomfortable, and they'll start maybe singing along with the music and saying the N-word themselves, or bringing up topics that make me uncomfortable. So I guess I sort of changed my behavior just to make sure that I don't see people that I respect in a different and negative light.
Does the N-word bother you when anyone says it?
Oh yeah. But it's sort of I have personally, I'm 29 years old, I have never said that word. And I don't think that people need to say it. But I believe that if anyone's going to say it, I think it's more okay for a person of color to say it. And yeah, there might be a double standard there. But I use the example that, my wife and I have names for each other. So I might call her, hey, babe, baby, whatever it is. But if someone else were to call my wife babe or baby, I would have a problem with that, right? So not all words and relationships are accessible to all people. And I think that that's probably the best analogy I can come up with. Because anyone can say the word baby, but I don't appreciate it if anyone else says that to my wife. And I think people can understand why that makes them uncomfortable.
Naya, you've had a different experience, and that's the beauty of you three, is that you're all from different backgrounds. South Carolina, another small town. You also talked about being a military brat, and you had different experiences in high school than you did in college. Can you talk about that?
Being a military brat, I was able to be around a lot of different types of people. a lot of different cultures. It was kind of a melting pot for most of my life. So I had white friends, Asian friends, Black friends, Hispanic friends, all that you can think of. So being able to be around that environment allowed me to have a very open mind growing up. But I was never really immersed into the Black culture until I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And it was amazing. Like, I didn't know that my people were so beautiful, and our culture and our music and our food was amazing and something that people admired. From that situation, I was able to embrace my skin color a lot. I know one of the things that I had implanted in my mind before being in North Carolina is, oh, like, the summer's fun, but I can't wait until the winter for when I'm going to get lighter because the sun's not out as much. So then being around a lot of Black people in North Carolina, they embraced dark skin, they embraced the culture, and they embraced the empowerment of Black people. So being able to have that experience, especially going into the next level of my life, which was at UNC, where it was a predominantly white school, going into that environment and having the confidence in who I was, I think it allowed me to be as successful as I am today. The confidence that being around people who empowered me created, not only for my skin color, but as a woman, as a female Black woman in sports. So yeah, I'm very grateful for all the different levels that I went through and how it allowed me to have an open mind.
You brought up that point about the beach or the season and becoming lighter. And ironically, a very wise man, David Flemister, who was on this show last time, said to me one time, and this was years ago, he said, you know, the irony of racism is that our beaches are filled with people trying to become darker.
Yeah.
You know, you think about that. It's a pretty profound statement.
Oh, and like the black fishing that exists in society right now. Like when people saw like the pictures of celebrities without any makeup on, and they see like the Kardashians, and they're like, wait, they're white, and it's like, yes, like yes, they have these bronzer lines and all that, but like, yeah, like they're all white.
Yeah, the hypocrisy knows no bounds. It's insane, but you guys are well familiar with that. But we have to take a quick break right now. But don't go away. We'll be right back. If you're in New York City and want to watch some great rugby, have some great food, and some great times, go to the world's best rugby pub, the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street. And we are back with Phaidra Knight, Alycia Washington, Naya Tapper, and Steve Lewis. Let's talk about the main issues that you face individually dealing with racism. Why don't you lead the way, Phaidra?
I think education is a prime component, both in the, or lack thereof, in the spread and fueling and strengthening of racism. And it's also education is the solution, or one of the solutions to eradicating it. We aren't fed a great deal of truth when it comes to history of our country. None of us, really. And that's, powers that be don't have, or don't, for whatever reasons, whether it's just they're just taking what they were handed, they were inheriting this, or whether they just don't have an interest. And I think with the current administration, personally, I think they just absolutely don't have an agenda to promote sometimes facts, and certainly the truth and the things that have happened in our history, and through a lens of accuracy.
So what do you think of the president saying that he has done more for Black people, arguably, than even Abraham Lincoln?
I guess I guess actually there's some truth to that, I think, in the sense that he has done so much to adversely impact Blacks that it has fired us up so much that we're actually now coming together. A lot of us, we're fueling, we're educating ourselves. We are inspired. We are motivated. We are just driven.
Organized, getting organized. Big thing.
And organized. There you go. Killer Mike, shout out, right? Because it's organized, it's mobilized, right? We are ready to go. And
let me ask you this.
Maybe
let me ask the three of you this briefly. Do you think protests will end if there is a change in the administration, if Joe Biden wins, for instance?
No. Because I think we understand that Joe, like I know him, Vice President Biden,
Joey,
is a better option. But I think the need to hold all of our elected officials accountable,
absolutely,
it needs to be number one priority. Yeah. Like we like the if he wins, it's not like our drive ends on election day or election night whenever we find out the results. It needs to be continuous.
Yeah, I think we're stopping the bleeding, but we aren't healing the sore, right? And you're right. You've got to hold these politicians' feet to the fire. I think you need to reform politics. You need to reform all three branches of government. You need to reform. America needs a complete reformation, in my opinion. And so Joe will stop Vice President Joe Biden will stop the bleeding, but we got a lot of work to do. And so, as Alycia said, I don't necessarily think the protest will end. I think that you're going to have a lot of protests probably from the far right contingent and the people that are more pro-Trump and fall into that or support that ideology. But yeah, I think that these protests need to go on. I think you got to fight this battle from several angles until actual fundamental changes are made.
Understood. So, Alycia, you're head or co-founder of the XV Foundation. We haven't talked about that yet, but you do have experiences that we've spoken about off camera with awkwardness or some kind of uncomfortable stuff when you enter a meeting room, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why don't you share that with us?
Yeah, I mean, we've had lots of meetings with employees in the union, pretty high up from the board to the C-suite. And one particular awkward call I think Phaidra was on too was a member, again, pretty high up in the union, couldn't commit to supporting diversity and inclusion training for the staff. And they have since said that they will do that and engage in that. But that was 3 months after the request, and they just couldn't say it. And it's like, it's 2020. If you can't say that you support diversity, equity, and inclusion training for your staff, then what are you doing? So it's always a wonder to me whether when we do get brushed aside, which we don't usually let ourselves because we are stay pretty persistent. Like, are they brushing me to the side because I'm a woman, or are they brushing me to the side because I'm Black? And if you were to ask them, again, the whole gaslighting thing where it's like, oh, you heard that incorrectly. Like, he didn't mean it that way. Or you should go with his intentions and not with his words. Sort of stuff like that. It just makes it like I love this game. It's brought me so much. And it was probably like, besides that second grade heartbreak, like, one of the first true loves of my life, rugby. But when I look back and see that, again, the lack of diversity on the board, lack of diversity within USA Rugby, especially in the C-suite, the lack of diversity in coaches and referees, I don't understand it, because it's such an accessible game if you make it accessible. And all you need is a ball and a patch of grass, and you have rugby. So when, I think it's just systemic, because it goes from bottom to top, where a person shows up to rugby practice, and if they're a person of color, like Phaidra mentioned earlier, they're either put in the front row to be, big and strong, or put on the wing to be fast and strong. Naya's black and an excellent wing, but I kind of wonder why more people of color aren't put in decision-making positions. And again, it's systemic because it's from the actual game at all levels to the administration, to the C-suite. Like you wonder why there's no black refs or black coaches. It's because the black players were not put in a position to make decisions for the team. So when, I can't speak for all wings, but if I only played wing, I'm not sure how confident I would feel to coach a team when there's a scrum, lineouts, plays in the midfield. Like it just goes fully up and down the entire game. So I think if you see a black player come to your practice, find out what their skills are besides their athleticism. Because they're likely going to be athletic if they're coming out for a sport, and that's across the board. But invest in their decision-making abilities as opposed to just being like, you know what you can do for us? Be fast. As opposed to, hey, let's help you develop your decision-making. And I think that will make a massive difference. Obviously, it will take time, but I think, we got to start somewhere.
Naya, it's only fitting that we go to you now because we brought up wings.
Yeah.
Do you find that as an issue? Do you want to play a different position? Do you have a difficulty communicating that with the coaches that you've had?
If we're talking about the problem with it, I think it's just the awareness and the accountability from coaches to, as Alycia said, look at people not for their color, but for what they could become on the rugby field. So for me, as humbly, I feel like the wing is a great position for me. Physically, I'm very fast. A lot of
You are.
A lot of Black people on the men's and women's side are very fast. If you look across the sevens board from every country, if there is a woman of color on their team, she's probably on the wing. Elia Green from Australia. On the England team, you have
Deborah Fleming.
On the French team, you have a woman of color who is a prop. So a lot of the times you see these Black athletes pushed to the ends to where they're supposed to just be physical versus mental. So you think like, I remember in the past 2 years wanting to move to the center position. Because why can't you be fast and smart? Why do you only have to be one thing or the other?
Well, you get to be both if you're white. I'll just say that.
Yeah, wait, are we saying that wings aren't smart?
Yeah.
We're saying that there's less expected.
Need to create, that they just need to catch the ball and run. So
I think, and there's a standard that you, in order for you, I feel like you have to overcome this burden of proof rather than just being put in a position, right? Like Naya, I'm sure you've been told, well, why don't you create on the wing? Let's see how you create from that position, and then maybe we'll consider moving you in. I mean, I don't know if you've heard that. I've certainly heard that.
Yeah, but we have plenty of fast, same speed as me white women that come in as wing, but quickly are moved inside, who maybe have come in two years after me. So then it comes to the question of the coaches. The solution is the accountability of the coaches. So Steve, we talked about before how that is something that is very prominent, a very quick and unconscious reaction to push Black athletes to the edge, to the wings, to the props. So the accountability there is, with you being aware of that now, Matt hearing that and being aware that that is something common, what are you going to do from today to make sure that you give the Black athletes more of a chance to show that they're more than just fast or more than just strong, if you haven't started doing that already? So Steve, what is your thoughts about that, on how you can
You're now in the hot seat with Naya on fire.
He's coaching Jamaica, so he doesn't really have that issue.
Well, I don't know.
So I think, well, thanks for actually asking me a question.
If he's got a white lineup in Jamaica, he's got some explaining to do.
So I think to your point, I think historically you're absolutely right. You've got typecasting, you've got stereotyping, and I think someone of color shows up at a practice. I think it was common practice to go, oh, got to be fast and big and strong. You're going there. I think that's still For a great deal of the rugby community, and I'm not knocking the average high school coach or the average junior club coach. I think it dissipates when you go higher up. So how do you deal with it? What's the answer? So I think it's about when you don't have players of color playing in halfback, 9 or 10, two things are at play. One is they don't get the white advantage part. And the second part is they don't get the opportunity, right? So opportunity means you can't show up at 27 and learn to be a good scrum half, fly half, right? Any country in the world. So we've got to have opportunity early. You've got to be able to play the game earlier. So I think this being able to play earlier is very important. I think organizations like Roots Rugby, which some of us are involved with here, and Derek Lipscomb, Kyle Granby, and Kamani, those guys. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to provide that opportunity. They're trying to provide a sevens program, potentially 15s, where players of color can play in all those positions. So it's playing early, and it's getting the opportunity to play in those positions. You have to have coaches who will give you the opportunity. I think that's the answer. You have to be mindful. You have to be intentional. And I think that's the difference now, I think, hopefully, is that we are, even those of us who are, again, it's going back to general politics here. It's not enough to be non-racist. You have to be anti-racist. So I think now from coaches, you have to be more mindful, intentional, and active about it.
Naya, you wanted to say something there?
What's the minimum age that you think somebody can come in, regardless of color, and play in one of those creator positions?
Yeah, I think you've got to be there sort of end of high school.
Because you got to think, in the U.S., a lot of us aren't starting until college.
I agree, and it's tough to get the. It's tough to get the time, the minutes. You have to be in those positions in particular because it's decision making. You have to have minutes. It's about experience, and you have to have the opportunity to play that position for long periods of time and multiple games. So absolutely earlier the better.
2 points I want to make. One, what you just said, Naya, that most of us don't start playing until college. Well, what is rugby? What is USA Rugby and rugby in general doing for those folks that don't go to college? Those Black folks that are maybe missed their shot at going to the Olympics, didn't go to college, and are just sitting there wasting away. All the pathways are created through communities of college. And let's be honest, like there are a lot of talented Black athletes that could play fly half, that could play center, that could play any position, that are just completely being overlooked. The second thing to you, Steve, go ahead.
This might be a little bit of an all-encompassing response, but I've been around forever, right? So as David Flemister was talking about last week, he and I have been longtime members of the New York Rugby Club since 1987 together, and he can recall when he was one of two players of color on the New York Rugby Club, and he'd pick one or two from all the other clubs. And that's changed. And I know that the change can't come fast enough, but when I look at the New York Rugby Club roster, for instance, up and down, we have a men's and women's program, and there are more players of color. Not enough, but there are more. And there are high school programs, and there are kids programs. You've got Play Rugby USA handling stuff in the inner city. Not enough programs like that to answer your question, Phaidra, but there has been a change, and it's not fast enough, certainly for you guys, because you can only go by the scope of time that you've been on this planet, whereas Stephen and I have been on a little bit longer. Go ahead, Naya.
Steve talked about the Roots Rugby team and how they're creating a place for Black players to learn all different positions of rugby. And you talked about the Black guy, correct, from the New York team that was bringing in Black people. So what I want you to be aware of is you have Black people creating it for ourselves. And we need you guys, we need white men who are majority of the coaches to be creating it for us. Not saying, oh, well, they're doing it, so now we're off the hook. Like, we need you to hold yourself accountable in that aspect.
And Naya, to add on to that, not just creating pathways to play, we need the people that are in charge to make room at the table for people of color. We need coaches to develop Black coaches so that we can actually be in those roles. And here's one that's a really big pet peeve for me: media. Okay, and I'm talking specifically to MLR. How many Black people are in broadcast, right? And I'm saying this because it's personally impacted me. How many times have I looked to see that someone who's a white blonde who's replaced me, and you see it in all sports, right? So it's not just on the playing field. It comes with, and when I was told a couple of years ago, we're going to use women, right? And this is not race, but we're going to use women on the sideline. You got all these women have carried rugby in this country. I'm sorry, right? The women's programs, you got a 91 team that won a World Cup, right? At any rate, you keep running into these walls, whether we're women, and I think it's the intersectionality of being a woman and being Black is, you can't talk about one without the other. But you've got all of these things. You've got the gatekeepers who refuse to allow people like us to come in. And so, you know what? We'll just have to, like you said, Naya, we'll have to bring each other in. We'll have to infiltrate, in the way that we can. But, it's impossible to get there, or it's nearly impossible to get there if you don't make room,
Alycia, you look like you burst over there. Did you want to say something?
It's my thinking face. Yeah, I think since the murder of George Floyd, I've been asked to be on, a number of panels, discussions, like lead discussions at work, yada, yada, and which I think is great. That's absolutely fine. But I guess this might be where it gets a little awkward. So like, at what point would you have invited the three of us to be on this podcast, if not for this issue coming up?
Well, you mean me personally or in general? Yeah. I view you as three rugby stars, and, I only do one show a week. So I'd probably wait until the season started when you guys were actively playing. If like Naya was playing sevens or the U.S. women's team was playing 15s.
Yeah, and I think that's the point right there is, there was no time frame, and I think that's where the accountability has to come in.
To be fair, in my defense, I will say that I try to just look at the news and do a show that week, which is not the ideal format for a show, but. I'd gladly have, if I'd gladly have an all women's program once a week.
Oh yeah.
If somebody could.
And I think like probably in the last 6 months or something, or I mean, actually in the entirety of my professional career, if I'm ever asked to be on a panel, it's about race. And I appreciate, because I think it's very important, but it's also, we are also the three of us experts in so many other things that I just want to put it out there that don't only turn to the Black person in your life when you need someone for race. I think part of the anti-racism thing is when you need, whatever it is, line out analysis, scrum analysis, like Naya's a superstar. Like Phaedra's been like playing a World Cup since '99. And then the phone only rings when it's about race. And I think that's...
Well, the three of you have been on this show prior.
No doubt. But, but what I will say,
I have not been on the show.
Haven't you been in the studio?
No. That was the other Black girl.
No, there was six. Well, there was 6 of you, and overwhelming me in the studio, which was great. But I apologize, Alycia. You are going to come on the show again.
Oh, excellent! And I'm excited for that. I just think it's important to have a wide scope of people, no matter what the topic is.
Fair enough, but again, I have to play devil's. I'm chasing ratings here, right? Too. So I gotta go where there's something, but at the same time,
getting back to Matt. I think that's actually a bullshit answer, and I love you.
This is where the awkward comes in.
I think you are awesome, but you're chasing ratings, and that's the excuse. That's the reason we get. That's what I get from every other network, right? Or every other podcast. Oh, we're chasing ratings. Well, guess what? If you bring in some new characters to your cast, and I don't mean toss out the old lizard there, because I think he's great, Steve, and I think he needs to be there, right? But I think if you add, you then ultimately can bring in more viewers, right? You got to think beyond what ratings right now. Like, you got to think about the future expansion and growth. And honestly, your responsibility as a, and I'm not saying just you, I'm saying people in positions like you, right? Others will be there to help, right? I think you have a number of people who would love to put their hand up to be a part of this your production and do some of the work to take it off of you that don't necessarily look like you, right? So I think it's just about offering that opportunity, and I don't think that will come about. It wouldn't have come about had not Alycia brought it up, or you had us on here. So
prior to the pandemic shutting down my studio show, I had Colby Marshall as a weekly correspondent on the show, and it was grooming him to be what he wants to be, and that's a sportscaster, broadcaster kind of thing. I get it, and you know what? To be honest with you, the light bulb did go off in my head when everything was going on with the protests, and I was like, I gotta figure out how I can help in some fashion. So yeah. The current events have dictated that I do something, and
we very much appreciate that.
I will say in your defense too, when you first started this thing, Meet the Mats, I was one of the Mats. You had Junior was one of the Mats. So you did actually have diversity, and you were the only kid on the block that did that. All I'm saying is, and this is less to you and more to the people that are listening, think about keeping it, right? Think about bringing it in and keeping it and making it intentional. Because when you make it intentional and you keep getting reps at it, it becomes more natural. And that's the same,
fair enough.
I think with many issues as it relates to race, right? At the end of the day, when you and I are sitting down and talking, when Steve and I are sitting down and talking, we're people, right? It's like Bill Nye, the science guy, and what he came out with. Is race really a thing? I mean, it's a pigmentation thing, right? And obviously because of the history of the world, but particularly the history of our country, we have infused this idea of race being something beyond or other than what it is, right? Or we've labeled this pigmentation of the skin as race. But is it really a truth at all?
No, and again, it gets back to what Flemister said about people on the beach trying to get dark. It's right. It makes absolutely zero sense. When you break it down, it makes absolutely no sense, and we have to do something about it.
I was gonna say, we do appreciate that you're doing something about it, but to your viewers, I just want them to be very cognizant that the last few months have been really exhausting for a lot of people, especially people of color, that, we've had to watch people that look like us being killed on TV on almost a weekly basis, if not just seeing the replays over and over again. So it's been exhausting, and I really do appreciate the platform. And I just want it to become more normalized that, women, people of color, trans community, whatever it is, we are a part of rugby, we're a part of this game, and I think we need to be represented as such, no matter what the topic is.
I appreciate that. And also, it's a good thing that you guys are able to, or feel comfortable enough talking to me or Steve and calling us out on stuff. And I don't mind that. And I think that's a good thing, because this is all about learning. It's a process. And I think facilitating the ability to call somebody out or voice some different opinions is great. I'm uncomfortable. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing.
That's how it's supposed to be, right? We are too. We
have to get, because that has to happen first, right? So I'll be that person.
It's like anything in rugby. It feels uncomfortable before it feels right a lot of the time. Like my first time in a scrum, very uncomfortable. But now it's, it's just the way it is.
And yet you want to play fly half.
Scrum half,
I gotta
please.
blow out. I'll talk to you guys later. I'll catch up with you, Matt.
Okay. Thanks, Phaidra.
Thank you.
Boy, I thought she'd never leave. All right. So, Steven, a couple of quick thoughts.
Yeah, I think we've had a bit of a missed opportunity here. I thought this is like part one of a thing that should be a part two, because we've heard about experiences. We've had some great points brought up, but we haven't come to the solutions part. No one has all the answers. I think the solutions lie in, and Phaidra's mentioned it, Alicia's mentioned it, Naya's mentioned it, it's education and it's opportunity. And so how do we drill down specifically? We're talking about rugby, but obviously we have societal issues. But within rugby, it's the same solutions. It's education, opportunity. And perhaps another time we can expand upon some of those possibilities.
Alycia?
this is great. I think getting the word out there, having understand specific stories is really impactful, because I think, people think of this as a really big issue, which it is, but if you can drill down to what Steve is saying into solutions based on our experiences and making it positive from a player perspective, admin, coach, whatever it is, and give them actual tangibles to do, the world's already becoming a better place. So I'm really confident, really positive that we're going to end up on the right side of this. Maybe not soon, but we will. So I really appreciate the platform. So thank you so much, Matt.
You got it. Naya, any final thoughts?
Just kind of off Steve, just that accountability of, as a coach, to create those opportunities for all colors of athletes, and then also as an athlete, speaking up for yourself, having more of an open mind of what you could be capable of, not where people place you. And I thought this was a great conversation. As Steve said, there's a lot more that we could talk about. So if there's ever an opportunity, again, created for this to happen, I think that would be amazing. And it's important that we have this conversation, whether it's uncomfortable or not. As Matt said, it has to be uncomfortable first for it to become comfortable. So thank you guys for having me. It was lovely talking to you and creating that bubble for a conversation.
That's a great way to end. And I want to thank all of you for coming on. Your patience with yours truly has been exceptional. So on behalf of Phaidra Knight, who had to step out earlier, Alycia Washington, Naya Tapper, and Steve Lewis, I'm Matt McCarthy in New York City for Rugby Wrap Up. Stay safe, everybody.